This is a recording of the Dual Language Immersion Session 2 for kindergarten and VPI families presented on December 13th, 2023. These were the presenters: Elizabeth Lua, Family and Community Engagement Coordinator for Arlington Public Schools, and Wendy Bermudez, the Dual Language Immersion Coordinator. This is the agenda for this session. First, we will discuss the purpose and goal of these sessions. We will go over today's learning objectives, look at bilingualism and biliteracy development in a DLI program, go over the 80-20 DLI model at Arlington Public Schools, and at the end, we will have time for questions. Our purpose is to enrich the educational experience of dual language and immersion learners by engaging, educating, and empowering all families. And our goal is to support kinder and VPI families in their understanding of dual language immersion. Session 1 was an introduction to dual language immersion at APS. Session 2 today will focus on bilingualism and biliteracy in an 80-20 model. And Session 3 will be on supporting our students in the DLI program. During Session 1, we learned about the pillars of dual language immersion education. You can think of these as the ABCs of dual language immersion. Bilingualism means speaking two languages to a high degree. Biliteracy means reading and writing in two languages. Pillar 2, academic achievement, has to do with how well our students do in school. And finally, Pillar 3, cultural competence, is about understanding how culture, our own and other cultures, affects the way we think and act. Session 1 focused on academic achievement and cultural competence, so today's session will be on bilingualism and biliteracy. Here are the content objectives for today. We hope that by the end of this session, you will understand what bilingual and biliteracy development typically looks like, the implementation of the 80-20 model in APS. The language objective is that you will be able to explain how the 80-20 model supports the goals of bilingualism and biliteracy in our DLI program. So what is bilingualism? Bilingualism is being able to understand and speak two languages. That's a big goal of our program. We're going to watch a video to understand how our students progress toward language proficiency.
How do you know if your student in a dual language immersion program is really learning the language? How can you know where they're supposed to be for their grade level? And how can you support them? With language proficiency, it's not really about what a student knows about the language or the words they can recite. It's about what a student can do with the language in real-world situations with spontaneous, non-rehearsed contexts. This is why proficiency scales are used in dual language immersion classes. They help inform parents about what students can actually do with the language. We can think of learning a language like learning a sport or an instrument. To be successful, we need to understand the rules, basic vocabulary, symbols, and concepts. Then, we begin practicing skills, and we need to keep practicing over time, going over different situations or pieces. Eventually, when we play in a real, unrehearsed situation, we can use the skills we've developed to succeed, and the evidence of our proficiency is clear for everyone. It's the same idea for learning a language. We want to become effective communicators and be prepared for real-world language use. So, with this in mind, let's look at the path of language proficiency. The American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages has developed guidelines that describe the major levels of proficiency: distinguished, superior, advanced, intermediate, and novice. How do you know if you're...
Where do you think our students should be by the end of 5th grade after having spent 6 years in the immersion program? In 5th grade, our students take a Spanish proficiency assessment called the STAMP test.
And novice. Each of the levels is then subdivided into high, mid, and low. Altogether, this scale shows the continuum of language proficiency from very little or no function to extremely well-versed and articulate. We can better understand these levels with the help of some simple analogies. Novices are like parrots. They can repeat back memorized words and phrases and speak in practiced, familiar situations. Intermediates are like survivors. They have the basic needs to survive in a foreign country involving simple solutions. They can create simple sentences and ask and answer questions, but lack the ability to communicate on a range of topics and are prone to frequent misunderstandings or gaps in communication. Advanced students are compared to storytellers and reporters.
Once upon a time,
They can describe and narrate in past, present, and future timeframes, and speak about many subjects in different situations. Superiors are like scholars. They can discuss abstract topics, hypothesize, support an opinion, and handle linguistically unfamiliar situations. We can then break down the sublevels. Those in the low sublevel are able to perform the level's tasks all the time, but with minimal quantity and quality. In other terms, they're barely hanging on. Students at the mid-level are able to perform the level's tasks all the time with solid, sustainable control and good quality. They are solid and strong. Those at the high end can perform the current level's tasks and perform the next level's tasks half of the time, but are unable to sustain it. The ACTFL describes those in this sublevel as fallen angels because they are close to being at the next level but fall back to doing the current level. Let's use another.
In Arlington, we use the ACTFL proficiency levels to see how our students are progressing in their language proficiency. The level superior is that of a university professor or a lawyer. Many of our students who stay in the program until high school are able to reach the advanced low level. And the expectation for 5th graders when they leave elementary school is to reach the intermediate low or intermediate mid range of proficiency. This year, our elementary schools have transitioned to standards-based grading. In your progress report, you will see 3 dual language immersion standards. One standard is for reading, one standard is for speaking, and one standard is for writing. You will also see a scale. Students will be marked as developing in that standard, approaching that standard, or meeting that standard. It's really important to discuss social versus academic language in a dual language immersion program. For Spanish-speaking children, social language begins at home. At school, social language is used at recess, in the lunchroom, and on the bus. For English-speaking students, social language in Spanish is much more difficult to learn, since it must be taught in the same way that academic language is taught. Academic language is the language used in formal learning in school and textbooks. Examples of academic language are words such as therefore, however, as a result. For example, in all vocabulary related to content areas such as math and science. Academic language is really important for success in school and in the professional world, and it takes at least 5 to 7 years to acquire it. This is one more reason why it is so important that students remain in the DLI program through high school and continue their study of language even further. Here's an example of social language. There was no rain for a very long time, so all the crops died. And an example of academic language. the extended drought caused the crops to fail. Both are very important, as you can see in this image. In an immersion program, families and schools need to work together to develop these language skills. We want to take some time to remind all our families that there are several factors that can affect one's language learning journey. These might be family background, opportunities to use the language, the connections between the two languages being learned, a student's motivation, and the opportunity that students have to learn that language in a formal setting. All of these affect one's language learning journey, and not every student will have the same path. But remember, along this road, they are learning both social and academic language. What is biliteracy? Biliteracy means being able to read and write in two languages. To understand how bilingualism and biliteracy work, we can use the dual iceberg representation of bilingual proficiency. Let's imagine an iceberg. We know that the part of the iceberg that we see above the surface of the water is only a small part. Underneath the water is a much larger part of the iceberg. In this figure, the part of the iceberg that's below the surface of the water represents the common knowledge that crosses languages. Above the surface are two peaks, or the part of the iceberg that we can see. They represent the things that are different between the two languages. The words for cow are different in the partner languages, but the idea of cow is the same. The same thing applies to reading. Students have to learn how to read the word vaca, or cow in English, but they don't have to learn what a cow is, since they already know what a cow is. Immersion students rely on many reading strategies that they have already learned in one language in order to read in the other language. So children aren't learning everything all over again. They just learn a new way to express the concepts in the new language. Here are some examples of early literacy reading concepts. Some are going to be above the surface. They have to be learned for a particular language. We call these features, unique to each language. Some are going to be below the surface, or the common understandings between both languages. These can be transferred from one language to another. So let's try skill number 1, identifying text features. If our students learn how to identify text features in English, will they be able to do that in Spanish? Or do we have to teach them how to do that in Spanish again? If you think identifying text features is a common understanding between both languages, you're correct. Number 2, print direction. We teach our students that they have to be able to read from left to right. Is that a common understanding between both languages, or a feature that's unique only to English or Spanish? If you said it's below the surface, you are correct. Expressive reading, blending sounds, and rhyming are all things we do in the two languages. However, some, like finding the difference between the N and the ñ sounds, those are unique to each language. And vowels with accents are unique to Spanish. The road to bilingualism and biliteracy can be a little bit bumpy. We're going to read each bump in the road statement, and then you'll share ideas you have for responding to these bumps. At the end of elementary, when it comes time to move into middle school, your child may want to quit the DLI program and go to middle school in English only. You may even be ready to give up. How will you confront this challenge? We have to remember that the road to bilingualism and biliteracy is a long one. Students need to continue their studies in both languages through high school and even beyond if we're hoping that they reach those advanced levels of language proficiency. And research is clear that DLI education offers Spanish-speaking students the best shot at maintaining their home language and developing high levels of English proficiency as well. So what do we mean by 80-20? The 80 refers to the amount of time students will be learning in Spanish, and the 20 refers to the time students are engaged in English instruction. As students move up grade levels after second grade, the amount of time in Spanish will decrease yearly as English increases until there's a 50-50 balance of the languages in grades 4 and 5. As you can see in this table, kinder and first grade implemented the 80-20 model this year. Next school year, second grade will transition to 80-20, and in school year 2025-2026, third grade will use a 70-30 model. When making the decision to implement an 80-20 model, we considered students' language environment. Outside of the school, our Spanish-speaking students are exposed to a lot of English, and our English-speaking students are surrounded by English all the time. In an 80-20 model, students spend more time in Spanish instruction, which will lead to a stronger foundation in Spanish literacy, and then our students will be able to transfer that learning to English. How will our Spanish home speakers learn English and Spanish in an 80-20 model? Spanish home language or bilingual students are surrounded by English, and they're highly motivated to use it outside of the classroom. They need many years of formal instruction to acquire English proficiency, especially in terms of academic language. When it comes to learning Spanish, these students can develop high levels of Spanish, but their level of Spanish depends on the continued use of Spanish in the home and highly developed academic language in Spanish through a rigorous DLI curriculum. I want to share this research on the disappearance of a non-English home language within a few generations in the US. In this study, only 5% of third-generation immigrants could speak the language of their grandparents. Without making a conscious effort to maintain it, families can lose their home language in 3 to 4 generations, showing us just how powerful English is in the US. So families, please continue to use your home language with your students. How will English home speakers progress through the 2 languages? When it comes to learning English, we have to remember what we learned in session 1. All DLI students do as well or sometimes better in English when compared to similar students who studied in an English-only school. Why? Because the DLI program supports English development for all learners. And English-speaking students have ongoing support for the development of English in the community and for some at home. When it comes to learning Spanish, English home speakers develop stronger proficiency in Spanish than students who study Spanish in a traditional world language class. They achieve high functional levels of proficiency, but their Spanish often lacks grammatical accuracy and their vocabulary tends to be limited. These students need to be given many opportunities to use Spanish outside of the classroom and beyond grade 12 if they are to reach advanced levels of proficiency. So to summarize, the more time our students spend in the target language, Spanish, the more proficiency and higher achievement they will have in Spanish without a negative effect on English. And students in 90-10 or 80-20 models are often more proficient in Spanish when compared to students that have been in 50-50 programs. So let's remember, the more bilingual our students are, the higher achievement they will have in both Spanish and in English. Here we see what the elementary immersion program looks like for this school year. In kinder and first grade, 80% of the day in Spanish includes Spanish language arts. That's reading, writing, speaking, and listening. Here we see what the elementary immersion program looks like this year. In kinder and first grade, 80% of the day in Spanish includes Spanish language arts with reading, writing, speaking, and listening practice in Spanish, social studies, math, science, and specials. The 20% of the day is English language development with phonics instruction in English. Second through fifth grade, which is still implementing the 50-50 model this year, Spanish includes Spanish language arts, math, science, and specials, and English is for English language arts, social studies, and specials. We want to note that science and social studies switches language of instruction in fifth grade. So social studies is taught in Spanish in fifth grade, and science is taught in English in fifth grade. This is what a day in kinder and first grade might look like. In the morning, students have morning recess. They go to their classroom and they might have morning meeting in Spanish. Math in Spanish, Spanish language arts integrated with social studies, and then they'll go to lunch and recess. In the afternoon, our students will have a period of English language development or English language arts. They will have science in Spanish and specials. In this slide, we have all of the resources that are available in English and Spanish for K-1 Spanish language arts and ELD core instruction. Our students practice phonological awareness, handwriting, and systematic and explicit phonics instruction in the two languages. We have opportunities to practice our speaking and listening comprehension. We have content-rich, high-quality read-alouds, and we focus on developing our students' language and vocabulary in the two languages. What questions might you have? I want to leave us today with this image. In the US, English is the Pac-Man of all languages. Across our country, we have children who come into our school system as bilinguals and leave the system as monolinguals. This break with the language means a loss of cultural identity as well. We are so lucky that we have access to a dual language immersion education where students have the opportunity to learn to read and write in two languages. Please join us for Session 3 on supporting our students in the DLI program on January 17th at 6:30 p.m. at Escuela Aquí.